Yeah, they've all gone. Go on, Howard.
We're on. Good morning and welcome to this week's Jump Discussion. We're having a bit of a giggle because normally I'm fantasious about the time. I'm coming on bang on 11 o'clock and all of a sudden it was just past 1 minute past 11 o'clock. So apologise to everybody coming on this morning. I don't know what to say really. Very
Apologies.
Very tardy. So good morning. Welcome to this week's Jump Discussion. Anyway, so this week, should you change market? Should you open a new office or should you stay in your lane? That's what we're going to be discussing. And it's a bit of a sort of bizarre thing to try and get stats on. So I'm going to give you sort of stats on the marketplaces so you can get a really good understanding of whether you should move or not. So market sizes. Measured by revenue, the global HR recruitment service industry is a $761.6 billion business in 2023. The recruitment industry in the UK, as we know, contributed $43 billion to the UK economy, according to the last REC report, and the recruitment staffing contributed $4.29 billion to the gross value add, the GVA, in the UK economy in 2021. So it says it's really growing. According to a LinkedIn report of 2019, and I use this report just to sort of get a scale of how the recruitment market is growing in Europe, the UK report, according to 2019, the European recruitment market was estimated to be worth a whopping, get this, 50 billion euros. But then according to the Staffing Analyst report came out last month, the European market has grown substantially in the last decade and is now worth a $155 billion in 2022. However, that also included the UK marketplace. So you look at their biggest marketplace, which is Germany, then it's France, Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. So without the UK in that European market, the European market is worth $112 billion. So it's still a really good marketplace. 80% of the UK market are agency workers, i.e. temps. If I remember rightly, Paul, I think you remember this from the Adecco days, France was the biggest producing country of the Adecco globally, and 98% of their revenue came from just pure agency workers, so no white collar workers, etc., etc. So it's a very big market and there's lots of things to look at. So the questions that we need to answer is about opening up new markets, irrespective of your global imposition. You know, should you open, shouldn't you open, what should you do? So this week, Paul's back from holiday, Dave's joined us, Heather's now away on holiday. So let's kick off because I think it's going to be quite an interesting conversation this week. So when markets turn and become harder to generate revenue, should you consider opening a new market or not?
Well, the thing is, it's how you define when has a market turned. Because by the time it's turned, it's too late. So I go back to our discussions we had last week, which is have a plan, make sure there's flexibility in that plan, and try to stick to that plan with the necessary flexibility to grow. In other words, don't do a knee jerk. If you see a market maybe waning a little bit, therein lies opportunity. Don't just give up and say, actually, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm now going to do this. I'm going to give up on the UK. I'm going to go to France, or I'm going to give up on healthcare. I'm going to go into education. I think it's really important that we are known for what we do. And we've all said over the years, haven't we, the inch wide, mile deep, that sort of approach. What do you want to be known for? And is there room for you to continue to be successful in that market before you consider either moving geography or moving sector? So I don't think there's a straight yes or no answer out to that.
I think you're on mute, Paul.
I'm on mute. Sorry, I was coughing loudly, so I put myself on mute. Just to pick up your point, Dave, I think one of the things that we are all acutely aware of now in the industry is how quickly the markets are, and I'm plural, markets are changing, and the business models that we've adopted over the years are beginning to change. And I think that, where markets change, when we're in a position when we have to consider looking at new markets, it shouldn't come as any great shock. I think one of the problems that recruitment businesses tend to sort of have is that we wait until we bang our heads against walls before we start to consider changing direction or looking at new markets, when the stark reality is we need to be consistently looking outside of the business on a regular basis to understand what's coming down the track. And I think that now is a situation where perhaps before we would talk about sitting down and annually reviewing strategies, or perhaps more frequently, maybe every 6 months. I think now when we review what's going on in the markets around us, it's essential to be doing this on a very regular basis, looking outside of our businesses to consider what's happening with our customers, with our clients, and indeed what's happening with our industry as a whole. One of the things that I thought was incredibly interesting when we attended recently the Recruitment Expo was just how much time people were spending talking about artificial intelligence, and how many organizations that were pretty new were in the exhibition hall providing new software, new AI mechanisms, if you like, for recruitment businesses to use. The market, our industry, is changing at an incredibly rapid rate. So when we talk about looking at new markets, let's be very clear, it shouldn't be something that suddenly happens. We need to be consistently reviewing what's going on around us to try to keep ahead of the trends. And you do that, I think, by being very, very tight to your clients, but also in looking at best practice in the industry, our industry, and trying to keep ahead of it. One thing is very clear: you cannot carry on doing what you've always done and expect to see the same or better results. The market's changing dramatically. So I think we need to be very aware of that point, and moving in that direction in advance of problems occurring to our current markets.
See, I looked at this two ways, and I looked at it in a way that says, and I think we've talked about this before, that unless you're really dominating your marketplace, then there's so much more opportunity in your current marketplace that you could be exploiting and opening up. So it's not about opening up a new market, it's are you actually developing your own market well enough. And I think I've said this before, I think lots of recruiters think that everybody knows them in their market when actually they're really obscure. Only a very, very small percentage of their market actually knows who that recruiter is, etc. And that's a company or an individual recruiter. But your comment there, Dave, about knee-jerk reaction, and your comment there about what we talked about last week about looking for the future, and you started to push into that as well, Paul. Look to the future, look for opportunities. It is about planning. And I remember being at Computer People, and we opened up a European IT market because quite a lot of our clients in the UK had European operations, and we saw an opportunity to do that. But we planned it, we put lots of planning in place, and it was the time scale. And I think lots of people think that I'm going to open up a new market, it's going to be the nirvana to help generate more revenue, etc. When actually it takes a longer period of time to open up a new market and start to generate the revenue that you want. And I think a lot of people suddenly think, if I just put one person into this marketplace, etc., that's a drop in the ocean. It never works. You've got to start to think about, if you're going to open up a new market, you've got to be putting 3, 4, 5 people into that market to really start to have an opportunity to penetrate a market that will already be saturated with recruiters that already have the capacity and capability to fill those clients' roles. So you've got to plan, I think, a long term ahead. So you're right, Dave, I don't think it's a yes and no answer. I think it's an opportunity answer. But to me, I'd always look at my own market first to see whether or not I am just, am I actually making enough headway in my own market before I start to look at something else. So here's a question then: using your past experience and expert knowledge then, how long does it take to get a new market initially to break even point, and secondly to turn a profit?
It depends on how you choose to enter the market. So there's 3 ways you can do it. You can do it completely cold. For example, let's say you're going to go into France or you're going to go into the States, and you just say, right, I'm going to open an office, I'm going to find some people out there, I'm going to get some space, and away I go. So completely cold. Or you can take one of your trusted and existing people, and perhaps part of their development plan, you may be saying, I would like you to lead our business into opening into this territory. And the third way, and for me by far the best way, is to be customer led.
Yep.
So you're dealing with a customer perhaps in the UK which has a business for you to execute on in another country like the States or France or wherever it is, and you go in with that customer and say, we want to open in New York, we want to open in Paris, we want to open in Oslo, whatever it is, would you support us? The most successful, in my experience, the most successful companies that have scaled, where they have scaled by geography, they've been led by a customer, so that they know that as they land to expand, they've got revenue almost automatic guaranteed. So if it's permanent business, it can take a few months to get that placement going, but once you've got it, you've got revenue coming in. If you start afresh, it can take 12 months. If you're just going into a territory without knowledge. And the frustrating thing that we often see with some of the clients that we have spoken to on webinars like this is that there is such a desire to have an international and global footprint that they spend a lot of time and money just trying to work out where to go. And actually the scoping is really important now. And I think you've got to spend time scoping how you're going to address the market and who's going to do it and how you're going to do it and how much can you afford to invest in that. And when you've worked out how much you can afford to invest, then work out, would that investment be better used back in the UK or back in your home territory? And if the answer to that is no, because I do want to expand, then that's the gamble that you take. It can be done. Many companies, many individuals running businesses have done it. I've done it before. It can be done, but as long as there's a really good base and a really good reason why you're doing it, then you can have success.
I think Dave makes some extremely valid points here, and just to pick up on one specific point, the thing about expansion has got to be led. It's got to be led by people that you trust who already have existing expertise and knowledge. To try to, as it were, force people within your business into leading an expansion, leading the development of a new market when they're not willing or they don't have the ability to do it is going to guarantee failure. And I know this from prior experience, particularly around my old days of, whilst not new, well, they were new markets, doubling the size of our office network, 60 new offices in the space of 2.5, 3 years. And on the odd occasion where I found myself essentially telling certain people that they were going to open offices for me, who were reluctant to do it, the end result was that the offices failed because those individuals didn't want to do it, weren't interested, and we ended up having to close a few. In the majority of cases, I had willing participants, people that were very keen to go and open new offices, and we had great success. So I think it's very important that any charge towards market change or expansion has got to be led by people who are enthused by the opportunity, are passionate about the opportunity, and want to make it happen. Hopefully you already have people in your business that could do that for you, but if not, you're in the business, as it were, of going outside and finding individuals that will do it for you. To push people into situations that they're unwilling to enter is guaranteeing you a frustration and ultimate failure. I think that's important. And I think the second point Dave made that I really, again, want to pick up on, and I really endorse this, is that one obvious way to establish new models or new markets is to work very tightly with valued customers. If a customer is keen to work alongside you in new locations or in new markets, that's a tremendous way to cut your teeth into something else, and it gives you the case study ultimately to take that to market and develop that model further. So I think it's a great point that you make there, Dave. It's very important. It's a much easier method than your first point, which is going in stone cold into an area, which is, I think, fraught with issues. And in particular, if you're going abroad, you really need to know your stuff. I sat and listened to somebody quite recently talking about companies moving into America, and she said, and it was very wise words, people come to her all the time and say, I want to open in the States. And she says, which state of America do you want to open in? Because all of the states are very different in terms of legislation and attitudes. And I think, moving into international markets is something you need a great deal of expertise to understand.
I think it does. And I'll go back to that when we opened up our office in London to do the European market. Everyone had to speak the native tongue and had to speak English. And we wanted the business language to be English, but we also want them to be able to speak the native tongue. And that's a hard task to get anywhere. And it took us 12 months to get to break even and 18 months to turn a profit. And what you're saying there, Dave, is what we did was we did it on the back of customers and drove it on the back of customers. If we'd have been allowed to carry on, because we flew under the radar of Adecco and they didn't like us working in Europe because they wanted their own countries to be capitalizing on that, even though they weren't doing it and still aren't doing it, we were next going to look at then putting offices out there. And your comment there about then taking a consultant and pushing them out, as what you're talking about, Paul, again, it's one of those things. You've got to start to think that if you're going to take a consultant off a desk just to run a different area, you're losing revenue, and you will lose revenue. So it's going to take you longer to get to a break even and drive that break even. So I think when you've got to think about it, it is about the due diligence that you do beforehand and putting the right people into the right market, and then really holding the purse strings tight to get to break even and then start to invest once we get to that point. But it's usually about 12 months from there. So what are the main issues? You've started to talk about some of the issues there from a legislation point of view. And we know that everywhere you go, there's going to be legislation, going into Europe, there's legislation, go to Australia, etc. There's legislation, there's timescale problems. But what are the main issues when going down this route that you need to be thoroughly aware of before you actually start to open up a new marketplace?
Well, for me, there are three issues: culture, and culture. Because I'm going to make the assumption if you're going into a new market, you know how to trade. So the legal entity, the contractual stuff, all the stuff that you know that you need to do, whether you're trading in the UK or whether you're trading abroad, I'm going to assume that you would make sure that those things are covered. So then it comes down to, culturally, the person or persons that you've chosen to go and lead your work in another country, or the people you are hiring, do they understand the culture? When I ran Parity Eurosoft, as a UK person who had never worked in continental Europe before, I kind of thought of Europe as the UK and Europe. And I learned very quickly that, of course, sounds obvious, but to me it wasn't at the time, that Europe is a whole host of completely different countries with completely different cultures and completely different way of managing. And I treated the chap that ran our French operation completely different than the person that ran our German operation. The people were different, the culture was different. I know that sounds obvious, but it took me a little bit by surprise to realize, hold on, I'm now leading, if you like, 8 different executives in 8 different nations. And culturally, I had to learn very, very fast how each operated. And that's still true today. In fact, after things like Brexit, where national identity is at the forefront of a lot of what we do, culture is so important. And to Paul's point about the States, running a business in Austin is very different to running a business in Miami, which is very different to running a business in New York. And the difference is culture. Yes, there are tax differences. Yes, there's price differences. Yes, there are different clients, but actually the culture of working out in those regions is very different. So for me, that would be the focus, to spend time on your people, the people you've got, the people where they're going to be working with, and the people they engage with. So culture is the most important thing.
I totally agree with what you've just said, Dave, and I'll add to that point and say that the other challenge of moving into new markets, and in particular if we're talking about different international markets, is the fact that you've got to be clear that it doesn't deplete your resources and ability in your home market. Stretching yourself too thinly may not give you the results you're seeking. In other words, in trying to extend into new spaces, you need to make very sure that the people you're taking out of existing roles are easy, or not easy, can be replaced, if you like. So, one of the things you've got to be talking about here is a succession planning program, because one of the great things about working for a company that is expanding, that is is ambitious, keen to develop, keen to keep moving forward, is happy and entrepreneurial, as it were, to expand, to extend itself. And the great things about that is there's an exciting environment to work in. You're talking about culture. It's a culture of entrepreneurism is one that's very seductive for people. People want to work in those environments. But if you're going to have an environment like that, and obviously we would advocate that you should have that environment, then it's very important that people are provided with opportunities to be promoted, to be trained and coached, and are given fast track opportunities to move forwards. When you've got that dynamic environment, then you've got great opportunities to grow and develop. You can't easily move into new territories, new markets, if you fail to ensure that you have succession planning in place. Because if you're going to invite enthusiastic, passionate people to lead the charge into new spaces, you've got to be in a position where you can then backfill their roles. And if that isn't possible, then you're going to stretch yourself to a point of breaking. So I think it's really important to have this in play as well. Making sure that people are very aware of your vision as well for the future, so that when they join the business, when they come in to be interviewed by you, they're excited by the fact that this is a dynamic environment where you can move forward quickly, where you have the opportunity to break out from existing roles, to develop new markets, to look at even international opportunities. That's a very seductive environment. So I think the other thing here about potential issues is making sure that that pre-planning is embedded into the business. Just to suddenly say, we're going to go in a new market and I want you to do this for me, and not have succession planning in play, is really, I think, courting a disaster.
I think I don't disagree with anything that any of you said there. I think the comment to me is that you forget how obscure that you are in your own marketplace, and therefore when you go into a completely new marketplace, irrespective whether it be in the UK or abroad, you are absolutely obscure. Nobody knows you whatsoever. And so building your trading name and building your surface in there is really important. And that goes back to being client-led. And Andy Turner's put a line in about concentrating on overlapping markets. Usually when you have overlapping markets, it's because you've brought into that market because you've been led by a client into that marketplace and drive that. So I think we've got to sort of think about that, is that you've got to work really hard to get your name into that marketplace. And I think the other side that lots of companies forget, and they start off, oh, we'll just put one person into this marketplace, and one person doesn't cut it. I'm afraid if you're going to go into a new marketplace, then you really have to go in, and this is all about then the risk and reward of opening a new market. So if you can't afford to put that money in and lose money over a period of time, then you're never ever going to drive a new market. And I see so many recruitment agencies who bring somebody in to do a new market in the UK and then get rid of the person because the person's not the right person. So again, it goes back to recruiting the right people, making sure you're doing the right thing, having more than one person going into that market, so you've got people on the surface that can hit the market. That to me is the bit that people tend to be completely thoroughly aware of. They just think they're going to open a market and everyone will come to them open arms. And it doesn't work that way. You've got to work really hard. So why do so many companies then open up international markets then?
Well, hopefully, because it's part of their plan, part of their strategic plan. So that would be one reason. Secondly, often the margins abroad, as in non-UK, can be really very strong. Certainly, if you can get your American business running, you can be amply rewarded for success there. I know someone who supplies building engineers to North Texas, working from the UK, and they've just got an office in North Texas, and they make 3 times as much profit than they do trying to supply the same skills out in Hartford, where he lives. And it's relatively easy to do. So the margins are good. Partly it's part of a plan. But also I think there are 8 or 9 levers to scale your business if you are looking for some sort of exit. And one of those is having a geographical expansion. So if you are intelligently working your business in the UK, let's assume that's the case for the people on this call, and you want to potentially scale and maybe exit your business or have choice of your business in a few years, being able to show that you can successfully trade in another nation is a good lever to add a value to your business. So they're three of the main reasons why people look to expand abroad. And I think for a lot of people in recruitment, there's a vanity aspect to it as well. You know, San Francisco, Paris, Sydney sounds better than Chelmsford, Leeds, and London.
How very dare you?
I don't. Personally, I don't think so. But there we go.
You left Peckham out of that description.
Yeah, well, it is. I was thinking of the Peckham thing. I only thought of the horses. And the title of that show is a tacit reminder to each of us: just be careful where you're going.
It's. I think you've got to be very wary and careful about opening international markets. Remember, that you've got to be in a position where you can offer something by way of service, delivery, your overall recruitment model, or specialist candidates in a market that presently doesn't have that capacity to provide those services. In other words, you're going to add something that the existing suppliers are not providing, or do it better than they're doing it. And remember that, if we're moving out internationally, as Howard said, you're an unknown brand. And naturally, local companies and businesses are more likely to use, if you like, the indigenous businesses they've always traded with. So you've got to come in with something that's going to be different or better than the existing suppliers in one shape or form. And so that, I think, suggests that we need to do our homework and be very clear about which markets we're getting into and what we can provide that will give us an edge, if that's the expression. I'll come back to Dave's earlier point. Clearly, one of the great ways of being able to do that is to be approaching companies that you already work with in the UK, where you already have leverage, you already have good relations, and be talking to them about what kind of consultative model you can provide to them, not just here in the UK, but abroad. Because if you've already got a great reputation with that organization, your opportunity to leverage that relationship and then to expand with that organizer, with that company, with that client is perhaps an easier route and certainly a safer route to take until you understand that market. And then you can perhaps expand from that position. I would absolutely advocate that working closely, providing those consultative services across borders with existing clients is the route to take where you can.
So to add to that, I think I've only got one thing to add to that, is that when opening an international market, one of the things that you are, or the reasons why you open it, is because as the market starts to accelerate, UK might be on a downward turn, America might be an upward turn, and vice versa. So you can start to spread bet your business and where it is and what's going on. So the following on question obviously is pretty simple. If you were opening a new market, would you opt to open an international market, or would you opt to open a market in the UK?
Well, it comes back to that point at the beginning, Howard. It depends what your plan is. Everybody wants to scale or grow or have high growth in their businesses. If you can secure better growth, higher growth, more profitable, sustainable growth by opening abroad, and you've done your homework, and the service that you supply is in demand as far as the trends are telling you in the market in which you want to operate, then consider operating in a new market, in a new geography. If there is still capability for you to supply your services in the UK, that often is a much cheaper way of continuing to grow. It could be that you're supplying permanent services that haven't done contract, or you're providing contract and you haven't done perm, or you haven't done interim, or you haven't done search, or you haven't done teams, or you haven't done MSP/RPO. There could be other services that you could supply at a more cost-effective measure in the UK before you consider opening abroad. I think that's a strategic debate for me that you and your leadership team need to have before you make that decision.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, Dave. One of the challenges, of course, of moving internationally is that it's going to stretch resources, and as a business owner or leader, you're going to be stretched because you're going to have to visit those countries, you're going to have to visit those territories, you're going to have a focus on what's going on, particularly to the point we made earlier about the investment that's required. If you're going to put money into new ventures abroad, then you definitely need to keep your eyes very firmly on that on those businesses to ensure you get a return on investment, as Howard was talking, as quickly as possible. So I think I'm going to come back to the earlier point. I think that you've got to make sure that if you're entering a new international market, that you've got your own UK market pretty much locked down, that you've got the key staff, key personnel in place to look after existing clients. And I think Dave's point's very valid here, that it's easy to look outside of our country and look abroad and look at opportunities there. But I would argue very strongly that you also, I think, first step would be to look very carefully at what you've already got and consider in the UK how much more can we do with existing customers, how much more can we do in our existing markets. When we look at most recruitment companies we work alongside, they often have wonderful relationships with perhaps 20 to 30% of their clients, where I'm very confident that we could do more business. And then we have moderate to very sort of thin relationships with other organizations. Typically that would be transactional contingent business. Now, I think you've got to look at your existing client base and consider, how do we leverage those great relationships to get more business, and where with our existing client base can we develop further relationships to start to bring those companies along. Now, I think that for me is the first step. And then considering international markets, absolutely, I'm all for it, but not at the expense of ruining what you've already got in the UK.
And I think I fully agree with that I'd look at my own market first and look at how I can really expand that marketplace. And as I say, I think most people are obscure in their marketplace, but their vanity thinks they're not. Their vanity thinks that they're massively known in their marketplace when really they're not. And I remember doing it with a client, and we were talking to the client, and he said, I don't believe we're obscure. And I said, okay, there's a company upstairs that has the same skill sets that you recruit to. Let's go speak to them. And so he said, what do you mean? Well, let's go have a chat with them. So I went and knocked on their door and we had a chat with them. They had no idea that the business downstairs was a recruitment agency in their marketplace. I said, that's within a yard of your own doorstep. Don't tell me you're not obscure. You're massively obscure. And I think that once you've conquered your marketplace to where you want to be, I think it's about having the revenue to invest. And if you have the revenue and the time to invest, then you can take the right time to come to fruition. If it was me, I would go to the States because there's less barriers to entry. There's less language barriers. Yes, there's it doesn't matter about tax, etc. Every country has a different barrier to entry on that. So that's just standard. You're going to do that when you go abroad. But I think there's less barrier to entry in the States for certain things. And I also think that the UK recruiter isn't treated very well by its clients. In Europe, it's almost similar, the way they treat UK recruiters, where in the States, the UK recruiter is heralded to a certain degree. So I think there's an opportunity there from that point of view. So often we talk about businesses, about the company having the capacity and the capability when it comes to opening a new marketplace. So how important is it to ensure the business has the capacity and the capability so it doesn't go backwards?
Well, in a word, it's vital, because when you open in a new market, it can be a little bit slower than you imagined. So you've got to make sure that there's capacity to develop and support the people you've got out there. Or it can race ahead, which is great news. And then you know that you're pulling upon additional resource, maybe from your home country, to support the faster growth than you expected. So you've just got to build that into some sort of capacity plan. How long is it going to take you to get people? What visas are involved? And what I would definitely do, and a tip from me to everyone here, is before you consider going abroad, register your business with the Department of Business and Innovation and get hold of your local MP and tell them what you're doing, because you will be amazed at the amount of support that is available for UK businesses that want to expand globally. It used to be make Britain great again. It was called Great Britain. It was a plan that we had about pre-COVID. But the bones of that still exist and are still available for all UK companies that want to open abroad. And there's money as well.
I'm going to say there's lots of financial help on that point as well.
Yeah.
A lot of financial help. There's a lot of help available. So again, as part of your planning for capacity, make sure your MP knows what you're doing, and make sure that you're registered with those sort of agencies.
That's great advice. I think you used a word just then, Dave, planning. So I started this conversation by talking about the fact that expansion, whether it's in the UK or indeed abroad, is not something that should be a knee-jerk reaction. It should be something that is being looked at continuously over a lengthy period of time, on an ongoing basis, in fact, so that when the decision is taken to open in wherever the States or in Australia or wherever the market is, or indeed, as we've just said, to really be developing the home market, this isn't done off the back of 2-3 months of bad figures. This is done off the back of a concerted vision, a plan that is well known within the business and is being worked towards over a lengthy period of time. And I said earlier, I think that means that you've got to be consistently looking outside of the business, especially now with the rate of change that is happening, not just to us, but essentially to our clients. So, you know, the sort of cliched annual strategic conference that businesses have should be pretty much done on a monthly, quarterly basis now. That's how quickly the market is changing. We need to be aware of that, so that we are consistently looking forward and planning, and not getting to a position where we're having to do something because we feel desperate and our markets are no longer working the way they were.
I think that word capacity and capability then comes together, and I think having the capabilities means that you've done your due diligence, you've got the right data sets, you know what's happening in that marketplace, you know that market's on an up, it's not on a down. There's nothing worse than I've seen that happen on numerous occasions. Clients go into a market and that market's sliding, and you're saying, why have you looked at the data? And there's so much data available nowadays that you can get data on every market and what's happening from an employment point of view everywhere. So I think that's the first thing that I would start to look is, do your due diligence to make sure that you have the capability, and then start to think. We always think about the capabilities, just have I got the right recruiter, but think about the infrastructure that goes around your current recruiters, or your marketing, or your CRM, or your candidates, or your clients, etc., etc., etc. You know, these are things that need to start to grow, and that takes time to develop, and therefore I think you've got to have the capability to do that. And then the second side is down to capacity. And as I said right at the beginning, you know, if you put one person into a new market, it's going to take you an awful long time for it to register on your P&L that you start to make a profit out of that. So if you're really going to open up a new market or a new area, then capacity becomes really important. And I think having more than one person in then. So when we did it in London, we did it with 12 people. We put 12 people in, and as a Deco, we could afford to put those 12 people in. But it still took us 12 months to get to a break-even point. It still took us 18 months to start to make a profit out of those people. And it's hard work. And I think that's what the people have got to start to think. You've got to really think that this is a completely new business that is dovetailing with your own existing business to move forward. So you've got to really think about the costs of putting it in, but it's not just the cost of the person, it's all the sub cost that goes with it, the marketing, advertising, etc., that goes from there. So let's flip the question. Why would you stick to your own market then? And if you were sticking to that market, what should you do to be increasing revenue?
Oh, there's an entire webinar question, H.
Correct. I like to finish on an easy one.
Well, hopefully you stick to your own market because you're good at it, because it's giving you the returns that you want for it to give you, that you're known in your market. Because it's really important, and I've said this many times before, if you don't position yourself in the market will position you. So if you are positioned well in your market, you are successful at it, you're known as good in that market, the candidates like you, the customers respect you, your staff enjoy it. If you've got that triangle right, then stay there. If you have the skills, the wherewithal, or the support that can move that triangle to another market, and you've got the time, the energy is really important, then you should consider moving. But so many companies have so much more to explore in the existing market, either be it in services or in the way that they go with their customers, that there's plenty to go at in the UK. We know that 90% of recruitment companies have less than 10 staff.
Yes.
So there's a huge market. I think the biggest, and I'm not sure quite now what the percentage are, guys, of who the biggest agency is, but I think the biggest agency in Europe still has less than 10% of the market.
Oh yeah, way less than 10%.
Way less. So even if number one doesn't have 95%, say, there's plenty to go at. So before you consider going elsewhere, make sure you satisfied yourself. I've also seen people who are just bored with what they're doing and they want a new challenge, so they go to another market. And sometimes that works as well if you do it right.
If I remember rightly, Dave, when when in 2008, we got dragged into a meeting with the heads of Adecco from Switzerland saying, there is a recession coming. We're going to buy the marketplace. We've had the analysts look at the UK marketplace, and at that stage, the top 4 recruitment agencies by size had less than 15% of the marketplace. That was the top 4. And the business analysts were absolutely going over the top with it, saying, think about, the petrol market, think about supermarket, the market, etc. The top 4 all have 70 plus of the marketplace. Yeah. This is a marketplace that is absolutely open for any and every recruitment agency to make money. Yeah. And I still think that now that you as a smaller recruitment agency has a better opportunity to increase revenues, by attacking your market, knowing where you are at within your marketplace and doubling down hard on that marketplace. Yes, as Andy said, you can start to then move into overlapping marketplaces, which is a lot more successful than moving into a marketplace that you are completely cold, irrespective how you get into that market. If you get through your own clients, etc., you are still reasonably cold in that marketplace. Yeah. So I think we've got to start to think, stick to that marketplace to increase revenue. You've got to really look at your existing client base, develop your existing client base, and then start to look at clients that are similar to the clients that are your top 20% clients that probably earn you 80% of your revenue. Yeah,
and I mean, just remind me, guys, what's the turnover of, you were giving stats earlier at the beginning, Howard, the turnover now in the UK, was it 43
billion.
43 billion.
43 billion.
Yeah, I mean, and of course we know that a lot of that 43 billion are the wages, if you like, of contractors and temps. But nevertheless, when you strip that out, it's a huge industry in the UK, up 22%, if I remember rightly, from 2009 pre-COVID. So, I mean, back to the point, there is plenty of additional opportunity in your market. And you're right, Howard. I don't think those statistics in terms of market share have changed a jot. I think we still are working in a UK market where probably the top players have less than 10 to 15% of the market in total. The truth of the matter is that even the biggest recruitment businesses in the UK probably don't own more than 2 to 3% of the market. So that then leads you to talking about the micro businesses, of which that constitutes the majority of recruitment companies in the UK. Can they build more business? Can they have more business in the UK? The answer is absolutely categorically yes. And I think it comes down to something that Dave was talking about. I think it's a lot to do with confidence, the confidence to go to existing clients and ask them questions about what problems they're having at the moment, what problems they're having or they foresee for the future, and how we can help solve those problems, take those problems away. Start to position yourself as a consultancy business, offering more than bums on seats. It's about providing solutions now. Now, you can only provide solutions if you're consistently sitting down in front of your clients and being involved in their strategic thinking and planning. If you're doing that, then you've a great chance of improving your market share locally or in the UK. And it may well be you still decide to open internationally, and we would certainly encourage that. But as I said earlier, I think you've got to make sure that you have firm foundations already in place in the UK, and that you've reached a point where no one can ever say you've maxed out your position in the UK. You've never got all the business you could have, but you're confident you're in a very secure position in the UK before you move forward and open internationally.
So to give you a proper idea of how obscure recruitment agencies really are, when I was given Spring to run, on top of computer people, it was right, okay, I'm going to have to compete with lots of consultants who are in the same clients. So I instantly did some market analysis on our market, computer people's market, and Spring's market to find out what the overlap of clients was. And the overlap of clients was 2%. So CP either top 1 or 2 in the UK at the time. I think Spring was probably 6 or 7. So some of the big players in the marketplace, only 2% overlap in the marketplace. So it sort of says the amount of market, how big the market is, there's massive opportunity out there to go to. What we need though for that marketplace is candidates. And what we're going to talk about next week is candidates, how to attract them, where do you find them? Because we have this question now constantly being put at us, where do we find candidates? How to get more candidates? The job boards aren't working. Well, next week we're going to have a good old talk about how to find candidates next week, where to find them and what you should be doing to ensure that you get a better candidate flow coming through your business. Paul, David, thank you very much. Ladies and gents, thanks very much for attending. We'll see you all next week at 11 o'clock. Now all the bank holidays are finished. Woohoo! See you later, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining us today.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, Have a good day.
Cheers, guys.